Hey there, everyone, and thank you for listening to Back Talk by Successful Black Parenting Magazine, the podcast talk show for parents. I'm Janice Robinson-Celeste, your host and publisher of Successful Black Parenting Magazine. Know that our hashtag for this show is hashtag BackTalk. That way people can find it. I can find your comments later and share them with the world. Now, if you go to our Facebook page while we're live for Successful Black Parenting and share the link with your followers, do that right now. So to let people know that you're joining us live, you can comment on Facebook right now, and I will post the best comments live on air, but do it early because it takes a while for it to get to me backstage here. So make sure you post your comments. If you have anything to say, questions or whatever, put them down now. Start thinking about them. My guest today is Dr. April Lisbon. She is an autism coach, a school psychologist who is also raising a child that is autistic and dyslexic. Welcome, Dr. Lisbon.
Thank you so much for having me on the air today.
Oh, good. And I'm glad you joined us. This is such an important topic, and a lot of parents are experiencing the same types of things. They have children who are affected by autism or some sort of special needs, and I really want to talk about that. It's dear to my heart because I had a special needs brother who was challenged from birth because he was born what they call a blue baby. He didn't get enough oxygen to his brain, and he had brain damage. And he lived for a very long time. He was 45 years old before he passed from complications from kidney disorder. But I was raised with him and protected him all my life, and so any topics with special needs children is very, very dear to my heart.
Yes.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about your background?
Yes, absolutely. So I am a 20-year veteran public education K-12 school psychologist by trade. I have worked in both urban and suburban school districts throughout my tenure. Primarily, I've worked with children from ages 3 through 22, children with significant developmental disabilities, as well as children with learning disabilities, autism, emotional disturbances, and things of that nature. So a lot of my training had prepared me, I thought, to parent a child with special needs, but it did not. Like I tell people,
Wow.
you can't do the one size fit all approach. And even with all of the training and the theory in the background, it did not prepare me to not only have one, but two children for a period of time with developmental disabilities when they were younger.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so both of my children had significant communication delays when they were younger, and they're about 33 months apart from each other. So that was very taxing in trying to have two children with developmental disabilities. However, it was my first son, my oldest one, who was actually diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum, which really created a lot of my advocacy for children with special needs, as well as opened up my eyes to what autism is really all about, especially within the Black and Brown communities. So that was a shift from what my training and educational opportunities had exposed me to throughout the years.
Great. I was going to ask you which came first. Did you become a psychologist first, or do you have your children first with disabilities? What happened?
No, actually, I was a school psychologist prior to having children. So I
Ah,
was a career person at first, and then in my 30s was when I had my first child. So I was already 5 years into my profession before I actually had my first child. So I had the training, I had the opportunities. I worked with the families. I saw the tears. And for me, I was like, oh, I don't know if I could ever do this journey. And then their journey became my journey, which was hard. It was
wow.
really, really hard trying to create balance between what I was experiencing at home and what I was experiencing in the workplace.
Well, it definitely takes a special person to be able to raise children with special needs because it takes a lot out of you. And we're going to talk about the support needed and, just having a tribe around you later on because I know watching my own mother do it, I was like, I don't know how she does it. I did not. My brother lived with us for almost all of his life. He had a few times he was away for summer camp or something like that for respite, but he was there. And she did it this into her late 70s. So I don't, it's and he needed care. He could not live alone. So that's different from, being on the autism spectrum, but he really had some special needs. So
Right.
even though we're talking about autism, we're kind of reaching out talking about special needs children
Yes.
too.
Yes.
Now, this is the hot button topic
Uh-oh.
because there's new research that says that Black children are not being identified with special needs enough. And
Yes.
there are others say that Black children are being misdiagnosed due to lack of cultural understanding. Is
Yes.
any of this true? And what should parents believe?
I will tell you, just working in a profession and having the exposure that I've seen, I would say that our children are being overdiagnosed when it comes to emotional disabilities and intellectual disabilities. And what I mean by that, and I know my colleagues are not going to care about this statement, and I really don't care. The fact of the matter is, a lot of our cognitive measures are culturally biased towards Black and brown children. And so a lot of the historical assessments, like your Wexler's and your Stanford Binet, which are the go-to for a lot of school psychologists, were actually designed to assess Army personnel as beta testers to see who would be officers versus who would be placed out into the field. So of course, the lower scoring individuals would be placed out into the fields, which primarily were minorities because they did not have the cultural and educational exposure as their same white counterparts. So we are literally utilizing assessments that were designed for the military to assess our children for special needs, for special education services to date. And
Yeah,
so,
go
yeah.
ahead, Miss.
And
Finish.
so
No, finish.
more times than not, some of those questions have less to do with actual knowledge and more so to do with, have I had the opportunity and the learning experiences to answer those questions? So when I'm very cognizant about how I look at the numbers and how I look at the scores for our children, because when I go through the actual protocols or just the information from the school psychologist, sometimes I question, did this child really understand me? Did you break it down to the point where they could understand it based on their culture and their language? Or is this something because they didn't have the exposure necessary or the opportunities to learn about it? Is that why their scores are so low? So I can see that a lot.
So, what types of challenges or disabilities are you referring to exactly that might be misdiagnosed?
For us, more so than anything, the ADHD diagnoses.
Hmm.
That's a big one within our community because and this is what I've learned through other scholars and just researching it myself, is that when it comes to African and Latinx cultures, we have a lot of things related to like drumming and dancing and just the beats. And it's a part of who we are culturally. We hear music at home. And so sometimes for our kids, they're still hearing the rhythms in their heads from the night before or from the day before. And when they get into the classroom setting, if you have a teacher who is, as I call it, a talk at you teacher, who wants all the kids to sit in a straight line, that doesn't work for all kids. And more times than not, what they're thinking is ADHD is just truly a child who, as I call it, it's just gifted a rhythm. And so we are constantly overdiagnosing our children with ADHD. Another one where we are not doing the best when it comes to identifying our children or overdiagnosing them, as I said, is those children with emotional disabilities. One of the things that we do not take into consideration is the trauma that our kids experience. And it may not even be trauma within the home environment. It can be trauma, outside within a community where these kids are being exposed to domestic disputes in the streets. It could be because they're not getting enough sleep because the police are knocking on doors, just different things of that nature. That then transcends to the children from home to school. And then all of a sudden, the teacher's asking them the question. Well, they may be just excessively tired because of what has happened in their environment. So yes, they may be, snap off on you for a little bit, but it's not that they're trying to be rude or anything. It's just, the stresses that they're experiencing. And then more times than not, those kids are identified as being emotionally disturbed. One of the things that I do think that we're doing a better idea of is that of identify our children with learning disabilities. I think more times than not, that has been underdiagnosed for our children as well. But from what I'm seeing with people doing better assessments, we are doing a better job of identifying our children with learning disabilities. The one, and I can speak to this as a parent, that you rarely see Black and brown children, but more white children identified as that with autism. Because traditionally, we are identifying a lot of kids who should be on the autism spectrum as emotionally disturbed or having intellectual disabilities.
Wait, say that again. You're saying you're not seeing as many Black children on the autism spectrum?
No,
Okay, so
no.
you think that's being underdiagnosed?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
because people are constantly looking at the behaviors versus why the behaviors are occurring. So
Hmm.
it's one of those things where some research that I saw another professor do indicated that by the time for example, our Black boys are 4, they are already criminalized as being a part of the school to prison pipeline by the time they're in preschool. So if you have a 4-year-old who's now a 6-year-old and they're having behavioral issues, immediately you're thinking, oh my goodness, this child is either severely ADHD or emotionally disturbed. There's no in between. And I'm seeing it right now with a couple of kindergarten students that I'm working with. Immediately they're like, oh, they have to be emotionally disturbed. I'm like, no, these kids have been traumatized for years, and this is a manifestation of the trauma. But like I said before, our children are really identified as being on the autism spectrum because more times than not, teachers are really looking at the behaviors, the output versus the underlying cause of the behaviors for the child.
Oh, I see. Okay. So there's definitely a case by case basis
Yes,
per
there is.
child. And it just, if it's regarding a Black child, it should be looked at, I think, deeper than
Yes,
just a normal normal test or challenges,
yes.
because you also, I don't know if do they look at what's going on at home usually, or do they just look at what's going on in the school?
You know what? It really all depends on your school district. So
Okay.
more times than not, and how they see the role of what we call the related service providers. So in some school districts, the school social worker is required to do a social history to help, in the process of an evaluation. But then there are other school districts where the school social worker is not required to do that social history, which is that in-depth what is happening in the home environment and what is happening in the community to see whether or not there's an alignment with what they're seeing in the school community. So when you don't have that social history, all you as a school psychologist can do is base it on what's happening within the school community. And that key background information then dictates and helps to determine whether or not a child is found eligible for special ed. And I have seen a lot of kids, over my years where that social history has been critical in deciding whether or not this is a true emotional disability or whether or not this is a true learning disability or nothing at all. So not having that critical background information does impact how we classify students for special ed.
And I wonder how much of bias is involved, because the reason I'm asking, because as African American people, we kind of know what our children might be going through, or maybe have a hint, because we're going through it ourselves a lot of times, and we see it and we follow it, and we just kind of keep up with what's going on in neighborhoods and news, and we might consider that, where someone who's not might be a little more oblivious to it and just think that this is what you see right out front is what it is.
Yes.
And maybe that child is going through some psychological trauma because their friend got shot, or something in addition to that. Or I mean, it could be anything. I'm just
Right, right.
putting scenarios out there, but
Yeah.
but we consider those things that they might be going through at home, not having food to eat, or
Mhm.
whatever it may be. um and I don't know how much does bias play a role in anything. I know tests are supposed to be
Yeah.
non-biased, etc., but does it somehow seep in?
I think that's a case by case basis based on the
Mhm.
teacher and their experience with working with children of different races. So I have seen some teachers who will do that deep dive because they've built the relationship with the parents.
Mhm.
They have been able to get past the barriers, and parents are more authentic and truthful with them, and will tell will tell the teacher what's going on. And then sometimes there are some teachers who are just very standoffish, and they don't want to hear what's going on. It's just one of those things where they're like, "This is a problem child. This is the behavior. This child needs to be
Mhm.
tested for special ed." So it's just really all depends on the teacher and their willingness to actually engage parents in that conversation, those tough conversations.
Well, here's the thing. See, I'm not a psychologist or
Right,
psychiatrist. I gotta give you that disclaimer.
right.
And I also, the teachers in the schools are not. Even though we have some training, because I used to be a teacher,
Yes.
of what to look for, I've seen teachers ask for a child to be evaluated
Yes.
when I'm looking at this child that I've known for years, and I'm like, no, that's not the case.
Mhm.
And it could be two kids, a black. I'm thinking of a specific example right now: black
Mhm.
boy, white boy. White boy's charismatic. He's he goes from classroom all the time, bouncing from classroom to classroom. Hey teacher, what's
Mhm.
up? You're my favorite teacher, blah blah blah. And
Right.
then but the black boy does it. He's annoying, gets written up. They say he can't sit still. He must have something like ADHD. And then they
Mhm.
refer him. And I'm like, no, this boy will grow up to be a man that will be a great salesperson. He will be amazing. These are skills that he has, but you're not seeing them through the same lens that I'm seeing them for some reason. But you see it with this other person, so that's why I thought, in this case, this is a mild case, but it's some bias was involved. And now I'm not saying that. Also, I want to make sure I'm clear. I'm not saying that that our children don't fall on these spectrums to be diagnosed, because they
Yes.
do, and like you said, there are a lot of times are being underdiagnosed for autism. So it's case by case basis. But yeah, so just keep in mind who's doing it, and I always tell the parents, always do your research, do your due diligence, find out what's going on, what they're trying to say. If you have any input to give your input. They're going to ask you for your input. Don't hold back. And if you think it's something cultural, bring that up too. Don't be afraid to talk about your culture.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, when a child is diagnosed at the school level with special needs, what happens, and does this record follow them for the rest of their life? Like they have this in their record?
It's a case by case basis. So by law, we are required to evaluate a child every 3 years to determine if they will still qualify for special education services. What that evaluation looks like is really based on how the school district sets it up. So some school districts will require updated assessments every 3 years, where there are other districts who will require what we call a records review for the first 3 years, and then a comprehensive assessment once again by the second cycle, which is year 6. Some students, they will be found ineligible for services. Typically, you may see that towards like the middle school years if they were assessed when they were much younger. And then for other children, it will follow them all the way up until they graduate out of high school. For those students who do continue to have an IEP and graduated from high school, they're then able to take that information, specifically the accommodations to college, to help them be successful at the collegiate level as well.
Okay. Well,
Yes, it's a case basis, yeah.
we had a statement from a Black male parent and educator who says he's seen variations from school to school within different districts too. And then we have, I think what she means here, if a mother has a mental disorder, this question is like a bipolar disorder, can her medication cause special needs issues in her child? I guess you mean when she's pregnant with a child? Is that a possibility, or?
It can alter brain development. Once
Mhm.
again, that's a case by case basis, but sometimes certain medications can alter the brain development of the child, especially when the brain is actually developing in utero. So for some kids, it can impact them. Not
Yeah,
all. Yeah.
I would think that doctors would monitor something like that and make sure that it doesn't affect the fetus.
Yeah.
If you want to follow up on that question, please do. I'd like to know more about what you were thinking on that one. Um, and then also, when a child is diagnosed, what support is offered to the family?
That's kind of challenging. That's based on the school district. So more times than not, when the child is found eligible through the school system, the support is primarily for the child. So whatever is in that child's individualized education plan, we do it at school. We try to encourage parents to follow up and review the goals and the objectives to help their child when it comes to homework. But as far as like outside community resources, once again, it's on a case by case basis. If parents don't ask for it, sometimes schools districts don't provide it to them. We typically, I know in my district, one of the things that we do is we do refer parents to our parent resource center, where they do have access, to better understanding their child's diagnosis, determining what supports and services are out in the community. But it's up to the parents to go about and access that. All we can do is talk to parents and share with parents, but as far as like the following up and making sure that they actually do it, that's something we don't do at the school district. And that's in a lot of school districts that I've participated in.
This is a great question, because if you don't know, you don't know what these are. But the question is, can you explain IEP and 504 and suggest strategies for advocating for seeking appropriate diagnosis and provisions of services? Great question.
Absolutely, because in addition to being a school psychologist, I used to be a 504 coordinator, so I can tell you the difference. So Section 504 basically is for general accommodations for individuals who may have some type of mental or physical impairment that impacts one major life activity. So, for example, if a child has a diagnosis of ADHD, it may not impact them to the point where they require specialized instructions through special ed, but they may need some general accommodations in the classroom setting to assist with concentration or to assist with reading. So we create accommodations related to the ADHD to help the child be successful within a general education setting. Now, when a child has an individualized education plan or an IEP, that's where we've tried significant interventions within the classroom setting, and even with those interventions in place, the child failed to what we call failed to respond to those interventions. So they need something a little bit more stronger, as I call it, in order to be successful within the general education setting. And that's where that IEP comes in if that child is found eligible for services. Now, as far as strategies for advocacy, as I tell people, I think the biggest thing that you have to know is that you are your child's voice. Um, if you know something that works for your child at home, speak up about it during those meetings, whether it's a 504 meeting or there's an IEP meeting, because what we're going about is based on what we've seen that may have worked for other students in the past. But you as a parent know your child better than we do at school. We know them for that 6.5, but you could tell us, you know what, for example, extra time won't work for my child because my child is always on the move, always on the go. So giving them that extra moment may not help them on this particular assignment. But if you jot this down or you create this visual schedule for my child, then you will see my child be successful. We can write those accommodations on that 504 plan or that IEP. But one of the things that I want to strongly encourage parents is to make sure that you are giving voice and providing those strategies to help the team. It is a team decision. It's team goals, it's team accommodations. So you have to make sure that you're bringing something to the table as well.
Awesome. I'm going to share this little viral story that we had happen that a lot of people don't know that we had something to do with. But there was this little boy. His mom contacted me because he was mostly nonverbal, and he started singing that song,
Oh, so
"Old Town Road." Old
yes,
Town Road,
I
yeah.
remember
And
that one.
she asked me. She said, "Hey, can you share this?" Because and at first I was like, "Okay, okay, well, I'll get to it." And then I went and looked at it. I was like, "Oh my God." And so we shared it and it went viral. And then it just kept taking off from there. And her son Daniel, that's how he started communicating through the Old Town Road. So you're right, whatever works for them. And I
Yes.
mean, he even got to talk to like the singer and everything. So it's Nas X, and it just went off off the chain, right? It just did, and I'm so
Exactly.
happy for them. Yeah, because this little boy needed that, and his whole family like just got behind that whole song because of their brother and her son.
Mhm.
So you never know what's going to work for a child, but that worked, and she's using it in her IEPs now.
Awesome.
So music, and that's how you communicate to him. But just any last words of advice for parents, because we're running out of time. If you have a question, put it up now because we're going to be running out of time real shortly. But any last words of advice for parents who might be in this situation, especially about building a tribe around you for support?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that you want to do, the first thing I'm going to tell parents is it's okay to be frustrated in this process. Just don't give up on it. That
Mm.
just don't give up, because raising a child with special needs, there are a lot of highs and lows that come in this process where you will question whether or not you have the ability to do this. Are you built for this? You are built for this. You can get through this. You just have to give yourself grace to fail in a process, knowing that it's in your perfections that you create perfection for your child in the future. The second
Yeah.
thing is ensure that when you are going to those meetings, ensure that you are bringing something to the table. Oftentimes, I see parents come in there hoping for the school to provide the recommendations. As I tell my parents, regardless if it's a 504 meeting or an IEP, bring something to the table, because there's something that you are doing at home that works that we can actually replicate at the school level. We need to know these things in order to make and produce the most robust IEP or 504 plan for your child. And the final thing is this: don't stop apologizing. Stop apologizing because you have a child with special needs. You don't have to apologize. If other people don't get it, that's their problem. Stop apologizing because your child may have behavioral outbursts. They may swear because it's a part of their disability if they have Tourette's. That's who your child is. That is your normal. You don't have to apologize to other people for your child being who he or she is. So
Oh,
that's my
that's
advice.
perfect advice. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for listening to Back Talk by Successful Black Parenting Magazine, the podcast talk show for parents. If you missed part of this show, no worries, because you can just wait a few minutes and click play for the replay of this podcast. Share it with anyone who needs to hear it. You know who they are. And let's get the word out. Our next episode will be on Friday, October 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time and 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and I will be interviewing Lindley Donnelly, who is a child digital safety expert at Securely. She will speak to parents on how you can keep your children safe in this digital age and how parents can address hard topics like cyberbullying and online predators with their kids. And, we just had that incident where this 11-year-old boy stole his brother's car and drove 200 miles to meet a man that he met on Snapchat chat to live with him. Yeah, Snapchat to live with him. He's going to go live with him. The only reason he got caught was because his GPS stopped working and he had to ask a cop for help. Man, can you imagine where that could go? And there's a deep dark web and everything out there, guys. So you don't even know what happens on those things. So please tune in to protect your children, because I can tell you, and we're going to talk about this a little bit next week, with a child commanding $10,000 for to enter into this whole child trafficking, that they're paying $10,000 per kid. It's going to be a huge problem when you got people like crackheads basically trying to sell your kid. And I've seen it here in Los Angeles already, where a child was almost snatched from a McDonald's when their parents weren't paying attention. But that was in real life. But now we have them online trying to get your kids too. So we want to make sure our kids are protected. And that's not to scare you. That's what's going on out in this world. So make sure you tune in, and you can ask questions again on the chat and Facebook. And if your question gets picked, I'll ask it live. For those who are listening via audio, I will make sure you know what the questions are as well. One more thing, don't forget to follow us too on Twitter and Facebook at Black Parenting One, and on Instagram at Black Parenting Magazine. Our website is successfulblackparenting.com, and it's full of good content to help you thrive and not just survive as a parent. Be sure to rate our podcast. And until next time, we'll talk soon. Kwahari, that's Swahili for goodbye. And I'll see you guys soon.